What if I told you that over a century ago, a massive iron ship packed with people simply vanished into the freezing fog off the coast of Cornwall? And when it was finally discovered in the year 2026, it completely destroyed everything we thought we knew about human survival. For over 100 years, the history books and military records stated that this ship was sunk by a German U-boat in the deep Atlantic Ocean. But just recently, a broke, exhausted, and desperate diver found it. And he didn't find it in the deep ocean. He found it deliberately wedged inside a claustrophobic, pitch-black underwater cave system, just a few miles from the jagged British coastline. And the most terrifying part of this entire discovery? The captain of that ship drove it into that lethal cave on purpose. You know, it is actually quite funny when you think about it. How many times in our own lives do we chase a specific goal, totally convinced that we know exactly what it looks like and exactly where it is? We map out our careers, we plan our relationships, we calculate our success. A simple path from point A to point B. We push, we hustle, we sacrifice our sleep, and when we don't find what we are looking for, we immediately feel like failures. We look at our empty hands and think we missed the boat. We think our timing was wrong, or we just aren't good enough. But sometimes, you haven't failed at all. You are simply looking at the wrong map. This is exactly what happened to an independent marine researcher named Dev. Dev had spent 7 grueling years of his life entirely obsessed with finding the HMS Dauntless, a World War I supply vessel that disappeared without a single distress signal in the winter of 1917. The official military records were absolute. They stated the ship was torpedoed 20 miles offshore, sinking into the abyssal depths of the Atlantic. Dev believed the history books. He poured his entire life savings into this massive project. He took out loans, he hired boats, he bought incredibly expensive deep-sea sonar equipment, and he spent thousands of hours staring at empty, glowing blue screens. Nothing. Not a single trace of iron or steel. By early 2026, Dev was practically bankrupt. His relationships were falling apart, his friends told him to move on with his life, and his family gently suggested that it was just a fool's errand. And honestly, standing on the deck of his rented boat, feeling the bitter ocean wind against his face, he was starting to believe them. Have you ever been in that exact spot? Standing at the absolute edge of your patience, feeling like all your hard work, all your endless menat, just evaporated into thin air. You give something your blood, sweat, and tears, and the universe just gives you silence. That is exactly where Dev was. He decided to do one final sweep. Just one last day on the freezing water before selling his equipment, paying off his debts, and giving up his childhood dream forever. But life has a very strange way of testing you right before it blesses you. On that final day, a violent storm unexpectedly rolled in. The ocean off the coast of Cornwall is notoriously brutal. The dark, towering waves were violently throwing his small boat around, forcing him to kill his planned route and seek emergency shelter near the jagged, dangerous cliffs of the shoreline. It was a failure. He was retreating. But while he was frantically trying to navigate away from the lethal rocks, his sonar equipment accidentally pinged the ocean floor directly beneath him. It wasn't 20 miles offshore. It was barely a mile from land. The screens suddenly lit up with a massive, unnatural geometric shape. It was a ship. A massive, intact ship. Dev's heart completely stopped. The impossible was right beneath his feet, but the location made absolutely zero sense. No experienced naval captain would ever, under any circumstances, steer a massive metal ship this incredibly close to these lethal rocks, unless he had completely lost his mind. Dev knew he had to dive right then and there, but the weather was practically screaming at him to stay on the boat. The underwater currents near the Cornwall cliffs during a storm are like invisible tornadoes. If he made even a millimeter of a mistake, the ocean would smash his body against the rocks, and that would be the end of his story. But this was his life's work. This was the answer to 7 years of suffering. He strapped on his heavy oxygen tanks, took a deep, shaking breath, and rolled backward into the freezing, pitch-black water. Almost immediately, the ocean attacked him. The current grabbed his body like a giant invisible hand, trying to tear his diving mask right off his face. He was spinning wildly in the dark, entirely losing his sense of direction. Blind panic started to set in. You know that suffocating, heavy feeling in your chest when everything is going wrong all at once? The pressure is building, and your brain is screaming at you to just quit. His air consumption doubled because he was breathing so heavily out of pure fear. He reached out blindly in the dark water and grabbed onto a jagged rock, cutting his thick glove, feeling the warm blood mix with the freezing salt water. He closed his eyes. "Breathe," he told himself in the terrifying silence of the ocean. "Just breathe. You have survived worse than this." He pulled himself down, hand over hand, fighting the furious ocean for every single inch of progress. And then, suddenly, the violent current simply stopped. He had slipped through a narrow opening into a massive, silent underwater cavern. He reached up with trembling hands and turned on his primary dive light. The thick beam cut through the murky green water, illuminating a giant, towering wall of rusted, algae-covered steel. It was the HMS Dauntless. He had actually found it. It wasn't a myth, it was real. But as he swam closer, floating weightlessly alongside the massive ghost ship, the excitement burning in his chest turned into a cold, heavy knot of pure confusion. The massive steel hull of the ship wasn't ripped open by a German torpedo like the history books claimed. The damage was entirely at the front. The thick metal bow was crushed inward like an accordion. The captain hadn't been attacked. He had deliberately rammed his own ship into the cave walls at maximum speed. Dev swam towards the captain's bridge, carefully squeezing through tight, collapsing metal corridors that hadn't seen the light of day for over a century. One wrong move, one brush against a rusted pillar, and the unstable ceiling could collapse, burying him alive in a steel tomb. He checked his gauge. His air was dropping dangerously fast. He had maybe 12 minutes left before he would drown. He pushed his way into the ruined bridge, his flashlight shaking in his grip. He was desperately looking for the ship's log, a brass safe, anything to explain this madness. Hidden beneath a pile of rotting debris, he found the captain's personal lockbox, rusted shut, but partially split open by a century of relentless saltwater decay. He reached inside the jagged metal opening and pulled out a heavy, waterlogged, sealed lead canister. When Dev finally broke the surface of the ocean, gasping violently for air and dragging his exhausted body back onto his rocking boat, he was a fundamentally different man. He had risked his entire life for this single moment. He took the heavy canister back to his small workshop, sitting in his damp clothes, and carefully pried it open. Inside, miraculously preserved by the airtight lead seal, were the captain's final handwritten letters and a makeshift emergency logbook. As Dev carefully read the fragile, yellowed pages, the real, untold story of the HMS Dauntless finally unfolded, and it absolutely broke him. The ship wasn't carrying military weapons or basic supplies like the government had stated. It was operating as a highly classified, secret evacuation vessel. Below the decks, it was carrying over 200 severely wounded soldiers and orphaned children, trying to desperately smuggle them away from the brutal war zone. And they were being hunted. According to the logbook, a German U-boat had spotted them in the open water. The captain knew his old, heavy iron ship was entirely too slow to outrun a modern torpedo in the deep Atlantic. If they stayed out there, if they played by the normal rules of the sea, 200 innocent souls would instantly drown in the freezing ocean. So, the captain made a choice. A heartbreaking, impossible, completely selfless choice. He ordered his terrified crew to kill every single light and shut down the engines to a quiet hum. In the dead of night, completely blind, he steered the massive ship directly into the darkest, most dangerous and rocky part of the Cornwall coast. He knew with absolute certainty he was going to crash. He knew his beloved ship would be completely destroyed. He intentionally wedged the massive vessel into that specific underwater cave system because the crushing impact created a temporary, stable bridge of twisted metal leading directly from the ship's deck to the safety of the rocky shoreline. The violent crash destroyed the ship, trapping the captain in the collapsing metal of the bridge. He went down with his vessel, drowning in the dark. But because of his ultimate sacrifice, because he chose to crash on purpose, his crew was able to safely evacuate every single wounded soldier and terrified child onto the Cornwall rocks before the ship finally slipped beneath the surface forever. The government, not wanting to admit a U-boat had infiltrated so close to their shores, simply recorded it as a tragic deep-sea sinking. But it wasn't a tragedy at all. It was a masterclass in heroism. The captain sacrificed his career, his beautiful ship, and his very life to save 200 people, knowing full well that history would likely forget him and no one would ever know his true story. Dev sat alone in his quiet workshop, tears freely streaming down his face, hitting the old paper. For 7 long years, he had been totally obsessed with finding a shipwreck just to make a name for himself. He wanted the glory, he wanted the financial reward, he wanted the massive ego boost of being the genius who finally solved a 100-year-old mystery. But holding those letters in his trembling hands, he suddenly realized how incredibly small and selfish his ego actually was. This was never about him finding a rusty piece of metal in the ocean. It was about destiny using him to bring a true hero's untold story into the light. His entire perspective on his own life shifted in an instant. The deep frustration, the years of lost money, the painful ridicule from his friends, none of it mattered anymore. He had spent his entire adult life chasing traditional success, but what he actually found at the bottom of the ocean was pure purpose. And there is something so incredibly profound that we can all take away from Dev's emotional journey and the ultimate sacrifice of the captain of the Dauntless. First, you have to understand that sometimes your biggest, most painful failures are actually your greatest victories, cleverly disguised by the universe. The entire world thought that captain had failed. Dev truly thought he was failing every single day for 7 years. But without that so-called failure, without that heartbreak, the real miracle would never have happened. We are so quick to judge our lives by the immediate results, but true impact, true legacy, takes time to reveal itself. Second, the path to your ultimate goal is rarely, if ever, a straight line. Dev spent years looking in the wide open ocean because that is exactly what the traditional rules told him to do. He only found his true answer when a violent storm forced him out of his safe zone and pushed him into the dangerous, terrifying, uncomfortable edges of the map. If you are struggling heavily right now, if you feel like you are constantly being pushed against the rocks and nothing is working out, maybe life isn't punishing you. Maybe life is just forcefully stripping away your comfort zone so you can finally discover what is truly meant for you. If this story hit something deep inside your heart today, if it made you rethink your own journey and the invisible struggles you are facing right now, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We share real, powerful stories like this because sometimes in this loud and chaotic world, all we really need is a quiet reminder that we are not walking this difficult path alone. Your support helps keep these incredible human stories alive, so drop a like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and join our community. Remember this as you go forward. We spend so much of our precious time trying to avoid the storms, trying to play it safe in the calm, open water of life. But sometimes, the absolute most valuable things you will ever find aren't located in the quiet comfort of the known. They are found right there, hidden deep inside the crash. The next time you feel like everything around you is falling apart and you are sinking into the dark, ask yourself one simple question. Is this really the end of my story? Or is it just the dramatic beginning of my true legacy? Keep diving, keep pushing forward, keep searching for your truth, and I will see you in the next one.